is made possible in part by MEMIC, providing workers' compensation insurance and safety training programs to help make Maine a better, safer place to work.
The following is a production of the Maine Public Broadcasting Network.
Newspapers and other traditional media have long acted as a kind of warden of the public square. They make judgments about the credibility of sources or letter writers, and they try to keep the conversation civil. But the rise of the internet and blogosphere are creating new challenges and opportunities for those traditional media. Comments pages are sometimes watched carefully by editors and reporters, but in other cases, it can be like the Wild West. Ethics in the online news world on this edition of Maine Watch. I'm Fred Bever. Welcome to Maine Watch. In this edition, we take a look at ethics in the online world of news with an emphasis on how newspapers manage reader comments that appear after articles in their online editions. Joining me in our Lewiston studios are Joe Michaud. He's the president of MaineToday.com. That's the online venue for the Portland Press Herald and its sister publications in Maine. Also here is Scott Fish. He founded AsMaineGoes.com as an email newsletter 9 years ago. Now it's an online message board that invites participants to comment on the news of the day. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred.
Thanks for joining us here. And joining us from our Bangor studios is Michael Socolow. Mr. Socolow worked for CNN and now teaches broadcast journalism at the University of Maine. He has published media commentary in the Boston Globe, the Chicago Tribune, and other newspapers. Welcome, Mr. Socolow.
Hi, Fred.
Thanks very much for joining us. I'd like to start with you. This whole world of news presentation and reader reaction online can be a somewhat confusing one, particularly when it comes to terms. There are various terms that we're going to be dealing with in this show. There's reader comments, there's blogs, there's message boards. Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of distinctions we need to draw between them?
Well, one thing about the distinctions is they are somewhat fluid, just to be clear here. But first of all, you have message boards, okay, which can be moderated or unmoderated. And they're places on the internet where people can go to exchange information or form support groups or form communities of interest to discuss certain items that interest the community. That's what message boards are. Commentary threads generally are comments that are posted by people who read an item or a post, and that can be published by a professional organization like the Washington Post or the New York Times, or comment threads can even be posted after public relations releases or even just blog posts. And finally, weblogs or blogs are online diaries, essentially. There's millions of them. Some of them can be very powerful and influential. For instance, this recent Attorney General scandal in Washington, D.C. about the firings of the Attorney Generals was really driven by a blog called TalkingPointsMemo.com. Others are just people talking about their daily activities. There's millions of them, and they're all out there in this thing called the blogosphere.
Well, thank you very much, Michael Socolow, for giving us an entry into the conversation we're going to have. To continue with it, I'd like to turn to you, Joe Michaud of MaineToday.com. Maine Today began its online presence 12 years ago. What got the newspapers, or the Blethen papers, into the online world? And tell us a little bit about how it's developed to where it is today.
Yeah, sure. Well, in 1995, the web had just started, and there weren't that many newspapers online at the time. And we took the approach that rather than just putting the newspaper online, we were going to try to figure out what is the role of the newspaper in the community, and then try to extend that into this new medium somehow. And that meant all kinds of different things, including video and things that we now call reader comments. But even in '95, we were doing things with citizen media. A lot of people may remember we used to do a thing called Day on the Bay, where we would have a Casco Bay captain write something every day about some incident that happened on the water. And they would literally fax that in, handwrite it and fax it to us at that time, and we would type it in. But over time, we would try to figure out how to get people more and more involved so that it wasn't just a one-way journalism going out, but trying to make our journalism into more of a conversation.
Well, now, why is that? We're used to letters to the editor pages are in the print edition of newspapers, or long-standing tradition of allowing reader reaction to the news that's being presented in the papers.
Sure.
What did the online world present that was maybe a little different from that?
Well, we found is as you, before there were any rules about what's okay online or not, when we step back and realize why the newspaper is the way it is, it's limited by things like space and deadlines, and a lot of these structures and rules that came around what is in the newspaper evolved over time and made a lot of sense to that within that brand and in that context. When you remove the things of deadlines and space and restrictions like that, it becomes very empowering, but also it can be pretty amorphous. So trying to put some shape around that and guide the conversations was part of the thing we were trying to do at the beginning, and that we've continued to try to do.
Well, I'm just curious, was it a matter of trying to keep up with the times? Was it seeing a potential revenue source? Was it driven by consideration of the newspaper's role in its civil community?
I would say the latter. It really comes out of the mission that we see as the mission that we have as a public resource in the community, and that we don't just produce this piece of paper. There is a role that we have as a company that it's one of the few businesses, probably the only business that's mentioned in the Constitution, and so there is an important civic role that we have seen throughout time.
Well, we're going to get back to the question of the civic role. And Scott Fish of As Maine Goes, your site, which tends to be a forum for people of conservative bent, not entirely.
Right.
It's developed over the course of 9 years, and it's actually probably the most read section is the one that's called AMG's The Public Square.
Correct.
Why did you get into this this venue?
Why did I do this?
Yeah, why did you do
I
this?
ask myself that question several times a day. Well, it's really very simple. I started it in 1998, and at that time I had been working several years as the press guy for the Republicans legislators in Augusta. And one of the most frustrating things about that was trying to get a Republican message out to the Maine public through what was then the conventional media. You had to go through the Blethen papers or the BDN or Maine Public Broadcasting, which was not an easy thing to do. If you were a conservative, it was even tougher to do. So anyway, just to, not to get too broad here. So that was, the idea was, let's have a place where conservatives in Maine, there can be interactive conservative opinion in Maine, where conservatives can come, they can talk about ideas, they can post events, they can, whatever they, I don't want to say whatever they want to do, but that was the idea. Just a meeting place, a public square, just as you would imagine a public square in real life. Different people get together, kick around ideas, agree, disagree, learn, share knowledge, and so forth.
A lot of it is responding to the news of the day. Michael Sokolow, when you look at As Maine Goes, can we compare it to reader comment sections that we see in the newspaper pages? Because often on As Maine Goes, there will be a section of, there'll be a news story cited, and there'll be a link, and then there'll be a whole thread of reactions to it. Is this one of the places where we see the similarities between the two forums?
I could definitely see the similarity, but I see As Maine Goes as really more of a community that is fashioned almost in response to what the media has done, as Scott just said previously. And I see the web as being empowering in this way, as a way to challenge more traditional forms of journalism. Yes, it can be symbiotic, as MaineToday.com is very well, but at the same time, these communities and these threads and these blogs can also challenge the basis of journalism as it used to be practiced.
And also become a player in the news as well. Scott
One of the
Fish.
things I was going to, that surprised me, I don't know if it should, but when people started coming to AsMaineGoes.com, one of the things I was hearing very often was, it gave people who didn't have a voice in the public forum a voice, and they would talk about their frustration. Geez, I've got this column that I've submitted over and over again to a newspaper, and it won't get published. I've tried letters to the editor. I've tried calling into radio stations unsuccessfully. So on the web, these people have an opportunity to express themselves if they're good, if their ideas are coherent. they'll get an audience. If not, then they won't get an audience.
Joe Michaud, I have to ask you if you agree with one of the premises of what Scott Fish has said just now, which is that there's the established media in Maine it has been kind of a barrier for conservative voices, and so something like As Maine Goes comes up as a response to that.
Having come from the newsroom, I would say that I think it's a barrier to a lot of voices. It's the limitations of newsprint and just people's attention span meant when I was in the newsroom, my hardest job was, of all the possible things that I can put in the paper, I'm going to only select a few. That's my job. I think that the opposite has happened with the web, where now we have everything, and our job is actually just to watch the edges of that.
Now, let me ask you, if I want to post a comment, there's an article on MaineToday.com that really gets me energized and interested, or I have a piece of information that I think should be added. How do I go about doing that?
We have a couple of steps, and there's reasons for each of those steps. The first step is you'll have to register, and that will ask you for your name, to choose a nickname. I believe we just ask for your zip, age, and gender, and your email address. You'll then get an email that you'll have to respond to. You'll get it immediately. So we have your email address, so we can talk to you if you do something wrong. Once you do that, then you can post your comment.
You'd ask for my full name?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can choose not to give that.
Okay.
When you post your comment, you will have a choice of whether to use your nickname or your full name with each comment you post. As the comments come in, they go into we call it a queue, and we have people on staff who are reviewing these comments constantly through the day.
How many?
About 500 a day now.
And how many people to review them?
We have 4 people working from roughly 6 to 6.
Okay.
I checked on this today, and roughly 1% to 2% are rejected. So it's a pretty wide filter.
Is it an automated system when I'm registering to go on? Is that, in other words, you ask for my name and you'd send me an email, but that's all done automatically, right?
It is.
Now, Scott Fish, if I want to go to your site and post a comment on As Maine Goes, what kind of a process do I go through?
You write a check to... No, it's a very similar process. The first thing I ask people to do, and this evolved, we used to have automatic online registration, and for many, many reasons, I don't anymore. So what I ask people to do is send me an email. If you think, anybody can read As Maine Goes, but if you want to participate, I ask that you send me an email with a short paragraph explaining why you think you'd be an asset in the discussions. And if I agree that you'd be an asset, then I'll send you an email explaining how you can register. And that's it.
So you are an active filter, though. And why did you move away from automated registration?
Because, well, for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't want a free-for-all. I didn't set up As Maine Goes because I had a burn to manage a website. And that's what was happening. When you have automatic online registration, not every creep in the world, but many of them will just log on and just make life miserable, and I was spending too much of my time sweeping up after them. So I said, how do other people do this? And actually it was Lucianne Goldberg, who I was able to get in touch with. I noticed her website, lucianne.com, which is a message board, wasn't accepting automatic online registrations. And so I emailed her, and I told her what I just told you, and she said, she just said, look, do what I'm doing now. And I said, a little bit leery about that. And she said, look, you don't need everyone posting, you just need the best. So.
Well, now, so the difference in registration policies, but you both do allow people to post anonymously without or under a pseudonym. Why is that? What's the purpose behind allowing people to put on a face?
And in our case, we've just come to terms with the fact that that's the way of the web. MySpace is set up that way. It's just so much of the web that I hate to think that there's another culture out there, but there's a cultural assumption about how the web works, and anonymity is part of that. And we've had to come to terms with that.
It's also a tradition. I started out anonymous on As Maine Goes because I was working as on staff at the House Republican office, and it was brand new. I didn't know how it would go over. And then I got outed by a guy who's probably one of the biggest users of AsMaineGoes.com right now. And then I had a phone call from Al Diamond and Steve Campbell from the Blethen paper. And hey, I understand you're Charlie Dutcher was the name I used. But anonymity has a long, proud tradition in American history. The Federalist Papers, all our founding fathers wrote pamphlets, and they wrote for newspapers under pseudonyms. There are a lot of people on As Maine Goes who, if they couldn't post under a pseudonym, wouldn't be posting. And so I reason that, look, a lot of good people on there with a great deal to offer, and I'd rather, hey, go ahead, post under anonymity if you want.
Michael Socolow, you talked in the beginning about the great value and the challenge to traditional journalism that these kinds of sites can present. Is anonymity a positive good in the public square, the public online square?
I think it is, actually, but I mean, it's not an unalloyed good. It's got its good and its bad parts, but I think it's good because it allows people to speak out in ways that they would feel more inhibited if they're attached to the comments. Again, that's good and bad. But if in a political discussion or in a discussion around sensitive topics, I think assuring anonymity when it's through these kinds of registrations, I think is a good idea.
Well, I'm very curious about this. I'd like to explore this a little bit more with all of you, because it is quite different from the letters to the editor. And I used to be in print, and every letter to the editor was vetted. It was the editor's the letters page editor called the person, made sure they really existed. They combed through the material to make sure it wasn't libelous or slanderous. And
I know who the people are in As Maine Goes. The public may not, but I know who they are by virtue of the way people register to post on As Maine Goes. Another thing we do that for liability is that we don't allow free email to register, because every spammer and troller and creep in cyberspace uses free email. And so that was another thing that I did. It has to be a valid email address, otherwise, off the road. So,
what kind of policing do you do?
Well, first of all, I want to make the point about letters to the editor. I think the interesting thing is that we only hear these conversations in the context of a website that's associated to a newspaper.
Yes, that's right.
And, those types of conversations are all over the web.
That's where all the problems are, Joe.
Yeah. Well, so it's almost like because we have that tradition, do we take ourselves out of
well,
this world of the web?
I think there is an expectation that newspapers have this long tradition of being arbiters and public arbiters, and sometimes these reader comments become very interesting places for what happens.
But Fred, what about a reliable source said, someone who preferred not to be identified, somebody close to the campaign? I mean, these are things. What's the difference between that and someone posting under an anonymous name?
Well, and that's a whole question about whether newspapers should be using those kinds of sources and when and under what circumstances. But at least you have a reporter and an editor who are acting as making judgments about credibility. Michael Socolow, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I would say that actually causes problems in some sense. Let's say you were watching television one night. Let's say you were watching 60 Minutes, and Dan Rather had a piece about memos with the Texas Air National Guard. And you had a suspicion that these memos couldn't have been printed in the 1970s based on the typeface and some other things. Who could you have complained to in 1978 or in 1988? Let's say you have the same suspicion about a newspaper article you read in the Bangor Daily News or in the Portland Press Herald. If you send that letter in, well, it's up to the editor to decide whether you, Mr. John Q. Public, or their reporter who they pay and trust told the truth. And in the case of the Dan Rather Texas Air National Guard memos, CBS was forced to admit, because of some work that bloggers did, that CBS itself didn't live up to the standards, the professional standards that they professed. So your analogy of the letters to the editor is interesting, but there are certainly problems in that system. It's not as interactive. The letters to the editors aren't as interactive as you make them appear.
In other words, you don't agree with my analogy, which I can handle. Let's Joe Michaud.
Yeah, I would like to say that I think that the difficulty here is that our involvement in citizen media comes out of our mission of public service. It doesn't come out of our journalism mission. And I think the challenge that I think people have is that they see those things too intertwined. And the fact is we still have journalists, and we still are applying rigid rules to what gets covered, how it's covered, and the rules that apply to that. And at the same time, we're trying to open up the public square to this other mission that we as an organization have that in some ways isn't related to the journalism. And I think that's a challenge internally and externally.
You have a long section of basically terms of use.
Yep.
For people who want to join in this discussions on maintoday.com.
Yep.
And it includes various things about what's acceptable or what's not acceptable. One of the things that you say is offensive language, such as profanities and expletives, sexually explicit or pornographic material, hate speech. And then you say, Blyth and Maine newspapers' news editors reserve the right to publish questionable phrases necessary to serve an important journalistic purpose. But that right does not extend to material you upload on our sites. Why is that in there? I didn't see that in some of the other terms of use pages that I look at. Questionable phrases, and you made a point of saying, hey, these might appear in our news articles, but that doesn't mean you can put it up. Why is that?
Well, there's a certain amount of judgment that goes into a decision to use a phrase in a news article, and I think the point was to say just because you saw it in a news article doesn't mean you're going to automatically have it cleared to get online. The terms of use in general are more a way to explain to people why their comment didn't get online. There actually are probably a number of comments that you'll find online that in some ways people could say, that doesn't seem to fit into the terms of use. It is a very, it's a human process. We got 4 people looking at these, and each of those 4 people tends to have a little bit of a different judgment.
Can I still post after 6 p.m. when you don't have anyone looking?
You can, but this is where I'll get into an experiment we're running at the moment. We have an experiment we're running called the whitelist, and after someone has posted 25 times and their comments have not been rejected, I don't want to say they've been approved, but they just haven't been rejected, they automatically earn the right to have their comments put online automatically without being reviewed. They don't know this, but it just happens.
They do now.
Oh, I know. I'm outing ourselves on this because we're in a process of now that we've been doing this for about 2 months, we've learned some things. The concept was we wanted to learn whether if people had been behaving themselves for a certain amount of time, would they continue if we weren't checking all their stuff. For the most part, that has been true. We've had a few that have violated and they've been kicked back off the whitelist, but there are, I think, 267 people who are currently posting. So if you were on the whitelist and you posted at 7 p.m., your comment would go up immediately.
How much of what ends up on these pages is just name calling? Isn't that part of what happens?
A fair amount, and the challenge is that is knowing how to rein that in, because it starts out as fairly civil discussion, and then it starts to ratchet up a little bit.
Well, and I wonder, Michael Socolow, I wonder, does the cloak of anonymity encourage a kind of speech which we might not make were we not anonymous, that's not related to these journalistic goods? For instance, we just have 3 minutes left, but here's a post from maintoday.com from the day that we're taping this show. It's about someone who was arrested for taking pictures of women in a public place. And Neil Kahn, 2008, wrote, "He's a predator who should be emasculated and have his hands chopped off." Is that the kind of language we would use if we were identifying ourselves?
Well, absolutely. There's this confusion between public and private, and I think people feel this kind of the cloak of anonymity allows them to say things they wouldn't be able to say face-to-face or in other situations. And it certainly can have an effect on the public sphere, a deleterious effect. But on the other hand, perhaps, who knows, perhaps there could be a new perspective or new facts about this particular case brought out by somebody who doesn't want to be identified.
Well, now, and there's this fascinating case here in Maine. There's the Dan Roberts murder trial in which someone who was talking about the trial online on the Lewiston Sun-Journal site, said that his girlfriend was actually a member of the grand jury that originally indicted Dan Roberts, who's now been convicted, and he mentioned that he had taken a visit with his girlfriend to the site of the murder and done a little snooping around and come to some conclusions before the grand jury was even convened. And now the defense lawyer in that case has asked for a retrial or a new indictment. And
there you have a very strange case, right, of a commentator actually breaking a story on a newspaper's website and affecting the grand jury.
And actually the Lewiston Sun-Journal's reporter then did go and find this anonymous person, presumably by talking to their IT person. They got the source. He eventually brought himself out. Scott Fish.
Just real quick, how Joe is absolutely right. If you let that kind of language go, it will descend very rapidly. One of the things that I've evolved over the years, we have within As Maine Goes a private messaging, which is sort of an in-house email. And so if I'll tell people, look, if you guys need to do this, take it to private messaging so only you can read it. I don't want to see it. If and if they don't, I'm not beyond just putting them in the As Maine Goes timeout box for a while. But it's boring. I use the same standard for the web that I would use if someone was writing a letter to the editor, oddly enough, or if somebody was calling in on a radio talk show. If you couldn't say this on the air, what makes you think it's okay to post it on the web?
Joe Michaud, have you considered providing sort of private forums for people to communicate?
Not really. That's
mud pits.
Yeah, I find it interesting. I think Scott is taking a different. He's taken some personal ownership of this whole thing, and I think that's an interesting approach. We're a lot more of a public sphere that where I think our challenges are to include even more people. And yet to find a way to manage all that conversation.
We'll end on that. We are out of time. Thank you, Joe Michaud of MaineToday.com, Scott Fish of AsMaineGoes.com, and Michael Sokolow at the University of Maine. That's all the time we have for now. For links related to online publications and ethics, go to mpbn.net. Click on Maine Watch, and we would love to know what you thought of this program and what ideas you have for future shows. Write to us at Maine Watch, 1450 Lisbon Street, Lewiston, Maine, 04240, or email us at mainwatch@mpbn.net. Thanks for watching or listening on the radio. I'm Fred Bever. I hope you can join us next week when our guests will include Governor John Baldacci and legislative leaders. Thanks again for watching or listening.
Made in Maine is coming up next, right here on member-supported MPBN.
Production of Maine Watch on MPBN is made possible in part by MEMIC, providing workers' compensation insurance and safety training programs to help make Maine a better, safer place to work.
Okay, so it's old. It's not being used. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have a use for somebody. Hi, everybody. This is Lou McNally. Coming up next time on Made in Maine, a sampling of surplus and salvage resources here in the state. You ever wonder where they got all that stuff they sell at Martin's? Well, we'll meet the Martin brothers and find out. We'll also learn about how to get surplus items from the state government. And I'll be here in Newcastle, right along Route 1 at Mott's Marine Salvage, where their motto is a seafarer's Mecca. All next time on Made in Maine.
Hello, I'm Consuelo Mack. Every week we bring you the best minds in the investment business. We cover all the markets you care about, from stocks and bonds to real estate and collectibles. If you want to build wealth and protect it over the long term, join me for Consuelo Mack Wealth Track.
Sunday at 5 o'clock.
Next time.
Money from Saudi Arabia and ideas from Egypt.
This is where it all begins, and it ends up in our neighborhoods.
We met in a park, and he had a detonator with him.
Frontline goes undercover to infiltrate the cell next door.
Tuesday at 9.
Oh, brother, it's wonderful to be alive if you let Jesus come into your heart.
She mixed religion with entertainment.
Real potent combination.
To bring conservative Christianity to the mainstream. Sister Amy on American Experience.
Monday at 9.
In Toronto, Canada, in a little room above a beauty parlor, a woman dies. The year is 1960. Only those at the funeral know the history of the woman in the open coffin. She is the sister of the last Russian Tsar.
Monday at 10.
Next time on Maine Experience. Though already an acclaimed poet and author, she remained dissatisfied.
I'm just going to withdraw and work, and eventually they'll come to me.
And come to her they did. May Sarton's journals from her York, Maine home have ensured her immortality. Then take a tour of Maine's historic covered bridges, plus New England's first stone fort, on the next Maine Experience.
Television, radio, educational outreach, the internet. This is the Maine Public Broadcasting Network. The program is a production of the Maine Public Broadcasting Network.
You know, just because it's old and not being used doesn't mean there isn't a use for it for somebody. Hi, everybody. This is Lou McNally, and coming up next on Made in Maine, a sampling of surplus and salvage resources around the state. Did you ever wonder where they got all that stuff they sell at Martin's? Well, we're going to meet the Martin brothers and find out. We'll also learn how to get surplus items from the state. Everything from desks to desktop computers to dump trucks. And I'll be here along Route 1 in Newcastle at Mott's Marine Salvage, where their motto is a seafarer's mecca, a paradise for boaters on a budget. All coming up next on Made in Maine.
Funding for Made in Maine has been provided by the Maine Office of Tourism, dedicated to improving the economy for all of Maine through tourism promotion. It must be Maine. The Maine Department of Economic and Community Development, whose Maine Products Marketing Program introduces Maine's businesses to the world. On the web at mainemade.com. And by the generous support of the members of the Maine Public Broadcasting Network. Thank you.
Three bells. 4. I wonder what that means. You know, anybody from a professional fisherman to a professional landlubber can find something in a place like this. This is a marine salvage shop on Route 1 in Newcastle. It's Mott's Marine Salvage, and they've got everything here. I mean, if it isn't just the, you know, old lobster buoys or the netting and the pot warp and things like that, they've got new line. They've got mufflers for lobster boats, sail bags, you name it. I'll tell you, if they don't have it, you probably don't need it. It's a boater's paradise, particularly for boaters on a budget. And it's all salvage goods. You know, given a choice, the true professional fisherman here in Maine is going to pick between new and used. They'll take the used every time. It's got better quality, they say. But we'll learn more about this spot in just a little bit. We're also going to learn from the Martin brothers themselves exactly where do they get all the stuff they sell in their stores. That'll be fascinating. But first of all, in terms of surplus and salvage, you ever wonder what happens to all that stuff they use at the state? We're going to find out right now at Maine State Surplus Sales in Augusta. You might think of the Maine State Surplus Sales Division as the state's own recycler by placing still usable items back in circulation, while at the same time returning $1.6 million to the state's budget last year alone.
The state surplus property programs are the state's best kept secret, and we do everything to try to get the word out that this property is available, that it's available to state agencies and to municipalities and also to the general public at tremendous savings. We advertise by putting ads in the newspapers for the auctions. It's statewide. For public sales, it's in the local paper. We also advertise in Uncle Henry's. Our website can be accessed by going to the state's homepage at maine.gov and navigating to state agencies, clicking on S, and going to surplus property, and you're right at our site. The mission for state surplus property is that we're the central point for the receipt and disposal of property that is no longer required for use by a state agency. At that point, it's offered to other state agencies for reutilization. This property still has value. Once state agencies have decided what they need, it goes to municipal.